sent me away!
I thought I lost you.
Then tell me why you destroyed me!
They say love outlasts everything, but what happens when the one person who loves you most destroys you first? That was the reality for Serafina Vale, a woman who boarded a plane shattered, survived an absolute nightmare, and crawled back to face the Mafia boss who broke her. Sacrifice so brutal it bleeds into betrayal. The lies we spin to protect our blood, and the wreckage left behind. If this underworld drama pulls you in, hit like and drop your city in the comments. Let us see how far this travels. Stay close. This one bites hard. The terminal smelled of stale espresso, floor wax, and 2 a.m. desperation. The dread that pools when nowhere is safe. Serafina Vale stood at gate 18 of Chicago O'Hare, boarding pass crushed in her fist, jaw locked. She refused to break down. She held on to that lie exactly like she once believed Dominic Viscari was a decent man. Both delusions shared the same fatal flaw. She needed them true so badly she confused hope with evidence. Final boarding echoed overhead, a muffled voice trapped underwater. 30 minutes. That was all it took. 30 minutes to butcher a 7-year marriage. Dominic handled it with the sterile efficiency he brought to every syndicate deal he needed buried fast. He summoned her to a private lounge, not their estate. Completely impersonal, he stood across a mahogany table that felt a mile wide and just severed the tie. She demanded to know why. He looked at her like a failing foot soldier. Because it is. He said, I owe you nothing more. The cruelty was so surgical, it did not even register as pain at first. Just some catastrophic mistake. An error she could fix if she just found the right angle. If she reached the husband buried beneath the dawn. She started rambling about their penthouse. Savannah 2 months back. Staying in bed until noon. The way he used to genuinely laugh from deep in his chest. Back then, she swore to love him forever. But watching his face across the lounge, she found absolutely nothing. Not malice, just a vacant void. Like she was reading from a stranger's diary, and he was simply tolerating the noise. Get on the plane, Serafina, he ordered when her voice finally broke. Leave, we are finished. She stared at him for a suffocating eternity. I do not understand, she whispered, her voice totally frail. I know, he replied, picking up his burner phone. That was always the problem. The gate agent's voice cut through the memory. Serafina stared down at her boarding pass. Chicago to Miami, one-way ticket. He did not even fake the decency of a return flight. Dominic knew damn well she was never coming back to the family compound. That detail drove the knife deep. He planned this hit. This was not some heated screaming match, spun out of control. An execution, a sanctioned cut. She walked right into the ambush. Before hearing the lock click shut behind her, Serafina stepped onto the plane, refusing to look over her shoulder. She dreaded what might happen, if she saw him watching her leave, or worse, if he was already dialing his capos, wiping her from the ledger completely. Serafina Vale survived plenty in her 34 years. She rebuilt from ash twice before, and she would outlive this exile. She chanted that mantra as she strapped in, watching the Chicago grid vanish into black clouds below. She held it together perfectly right up until the storm hit. The turbulence struck fast. That detail haunted her later. Not the violence, but the blinding speed. 1 second the cabin sat dead quiet. Just that familiar hum she used to sleep through when she and Dominic hopped jets everywhere. Back when their marriage felt completely untouchable. A life other people only collected photos of. Then the plane slammed violently sideways. Overhead bins rattled hard. Someone behind her choked out a terrified gasp. Flight attendant scrambled for jump seats. Right then, Serafina knew this was no ordinary turbulence. She gripped the armrests as the jet completely dropped. A terrifying free fall. In that surreal plunge, her mind raced back to the lounge. Did Dominic somehow know? Was there a reality where she never boarded? Furious, heartbroken, but absolutely alive in the terminal. The cabin lights flickered. The intercom crackled. The pilot sounded stiff, projecting that forced calm men use when a situation is bleeding out of control. He claimed they were diverting around a rough storm front. A significant delay, he called it, but Serafina spent years translating Mafia doublespeak. She heard the silent spaces between his words perfectly. This storm was far too massive to dodge. They were already rotting inside the belly of it. Surviving the next 5 minutes would require absolute, terrifying stillness. Time to pray, if you believed in that. Serafina did not. 7 years with Dominic Viscari burned her faith completely. In his syndicate, if a problem could not be bribed, threatened, or manipulated, it did not exist. She absorbed that brutal logic, soaking up the poison of the man she loved. Not by force, but proximity, the slow erosion of your instincts. She gripped the armrests and absolutely refused to pray, staring into the pitch-black void. Dominic's insult echoed loud, never strong enough. Then the jet rolled violently left. A woman across the aisle choked on a half-born scream. A suitcase crashed onto the floor out back. The flight attendants sat rigid, faces totally deadpan. Serafina recognized that blank mask instantly. A trained, deliberate shield. It was exactly how she survived syndicate sit-downs, faking absolute ice-cold composure because the only other option was tearing yourself apart. Then the engines whined into a sickly new pitch. She had never heard metal groan quite like that. It was not a noise you had to analyze. It hit to the nervous system before the brain even processed it. A primal, deep tissue instincts, screaming the translation immediately. The machine is dying. The cabin shattered, not just screaming a violent rush of thrashing bodies and raw panic. 43 passengers, all hitting the same terrifying conclusion, at once. The closest attendant grabbed the intercom, her robotic calm totally stripped away. She barked at everyone to brace for impact. Dig out the safety cards. Prepare for the ground. Serafina's fingers felt like lead. She jerked her seatbelt tight, folded her chest to her knees, and locked her arms overhead, mimicking those safety videos she ignored for years. The jet was going down, not just dropping quite yet, but plunging with a dark, heavy purpose completely off the flight plan. The jagged mountains below suddenly felt real, a threat she never quite believed until right now. She thought of Dominic, not the cold boss in the lounge, the other one, the quiet man in their kitchen at dawn, brewing espresso with a focus so intense, it almost made her smile. The husband who drove 2 hours through blinding sleet to bring her soup, just because she mentioned feeling sick. That man, the ghost she spent the last few hours deciding, was either a pathetic fairy tale she invented, or someone the underworld had entirely erased. She thought, I never told him that I understood who he was underneath the rest of it. She thought if this is how it ends, he will think he was right to let me go. The crash hit in brutal stages. First came the trees. She learned that later, when investigators broke down the black box data, when the sheer terror of it was translated into cold, sterile physics, and she could finally process the wreckage as data instead of agony. The trees took the hit. The fuselage held. No explosion. It just tore open against a remote Tennessee mountainside. At 3:47 in the morning, a brutal storm killed radar, grounding rescue crews for 18 hours. Serafina woke to the smell of jet fuel, pine, and something metallic. With a strange calm of shock, she recognized the blood. Her blood, leaking from a gash above her left eye. Total darkness in the cabin, except for the emergency floor lights that somehow survived the crash. Small orange beacons pointed through the twisted metal toward the exits, assuming the exits were even still there. She was alive. She checked her body for damage with cold, methodical focus blocking out the panic entirely. A gash over the eye, bruised ribs. Every single breath cost her. Her left shoulder took a hard hit on impact. She could move the arm, but lifting it past her chest sent a blinding spike through her nerves. Still breathing. Relatively intact. She was stranded on a Tennessee mountain, in the dead of night, absolutely hammered by a storm. And in the most literal sense possible, she was entirely on her own. She forced herself out of the seat. The very first thing she did was check the passengers around her. The guy in the window seat was out cold but breathing. Moving him might snap his spine, so she left him. She navigated up and down the shattered cabin, following the orange floor lights. 43 people on the flight manifest. She did a rough head count in the wreckage. 31 answered her voice. Some made sense. Some did not. Some were bleeding. Others just wandered around in the floating, detached haze of pure shock. The missing passengers, she absolutely refused to think about them yet. Not yet. Then a man grabbed her arm. Carl. He forced out his name, just needing to prove to someone he still existed. She understood that completely. Carl spent 15 years as an army medic. In 4 minutes, he became the most important person on that mountain, handling the triage she could not. He navigated the cabin with cold, controlled purpose. She recognized that look. It was exactly how Dominic operated when the crime family was under fire, killing all emotion to get the ugly work done. She let Carl handle his job, and she did hers. She organized. For 7 years, she was the quiet engine, running Dominic Viscary and his empire. She stayed out of the blood and the street rackets. She ran the clean side the shell companies, the heavy logistics, keeping the family assets exactly where they belonged. She was good at it, better than the boss ever wanted to admit. Now she tackled the burning wreckage with that exact same skill, dragging passengers out of their shock, forcing them to work. She assigned tasks to whoever could still stand. Rip open those overhead bins. Hunt down the emergency survival kits. Mark the weak spots so nobody drops through the floor. The storm just kept hammering the shattered fuselage. Through the buckled metal, she stared out at the black tree line and the violent, sideways rain. Zero visibility, zero cell signal. Just the screaming wind, the freezing downpour, and the quiet groans of the dying. She sat on a busted armrest, pressing a soaked sleeve to her head. For exactly 1 minute, she let the crushing reality hit. She had boarded that flight totally shattered. Her husband stood in a VIP lounge and gutted their marriage with cold precision. She bought every lie, terrified it was real. She never even looked for cracks in his performance. She let him ship her off like excess inventory, a useless asset to the crime family. And now she was here. Dominic Viscari had absolutely no idea. By the time anyone reached this mountain, she might just be another frozen corpse. He would get the news on a secure phone, sitting in some spotless, untouchable office. He'd freeze for a second, then keep moving. That was what Dominic Viscari always did. The boss never stopped for grief. He built a mafia empire, believing that standing still gets you killed. God, she hated him for that. She forced herself up. A girl in the back was crying with the quiet, broken rhythm of someone who knows nobody is coming. Somebody had to sit with her. The night dragged on in brutal, freezing increments. The rain never quit. Lightning flashes revealed heavy timber, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 feet up. A rough guess, but totally useless for surviving it. They found 3 emergency kits in the wreckage. Inside a Mylar thermal blanket, a tiny first aid kit, water purification tablets, a signal mirror, and a cheap plastic whistle. They scavenged the carry-on bags, mostly junk food, but a woman named Dira had 2 full water bottles from some expensive wellness retreat. It was better than nothing. Carl worked the trauma cases all night long. Serafina Vale backed him up. They set up a rigid rotation. 2 guarded the critical patients. Another pair watched the torn fuselage. The rest rested in shifts. Serafina never slept. Didn't even try. Every time she closed her eyes, her nervous system violently rejected it. A silent alarm just kept screaming in her blood. Around 4 in the morning, the rain finally stopped, leaving a heavy, dead silence. The guy from the window seat, James, according to the wallet she pulled during triage, suddenly opened his eyes. He stared at her, completely lost, trying to piece reality back together. "We went down," she told him. "You're hurt, but you're breathing. Don't move your neck. A medic is watching over you. You're going to make it." She said it the exact way. Mob wives say everything projecting total certainty when you have absolutely none. Sometimes people just need the lie, a lot more than the brutal truth. James studied her face. He took in the dried blood, the dark bruises forming on her jaw, and the iron grip she kept on her own panic. "You're not okay," he whispered. For the first time all night, somebody actually saw her. The words hit hard. She buried the feeling instantly, handled it like a controlled demolition, locking the emotion down, so the shockwave stayed contained. "None of us are okay," she replied. "That's fine. We don't need to be right now." Dawn arrived in a soaking, miserable gray. The storm finally broke. The violent wind died down into a heavy, silent overcast. Gray light poured through the shattered windows, revealing the true scale of the wreck. The front of the plane was mostly intact. The tail section had ripped off, lying 30 feet up the muddy slope. She knew from her first head count a lot of people back there were gone. She pushed it down. No time for corpses. Instead, her mind kept drifting back to Dominic Viscari. The exact look on his face when he told her they were done. She knew his tells. She'd watched the boss manipulate rooms for years, projecting cold power to mask whatever he was really feeling inside. Back in the lounge, she convinced herself his dead eyes were real, that he truly felt absolutely nothing. But now, freezing on a Tennessee mountain in a cheap foil blanket, with a stranger passed out on her shoulder, Serafina Vale replayed the tape. She looked at the memory again, and she finally saw the lie. It was his hands. He kept them perfectly still, not a relaxed stillness, but a violent, forced suppression. She knew those hands better than anyone. She spent 7 years watching them. When Dominic felt nothing, his hands were loose. When he was burying a massive threat, they went stiff as iron, exactly like they did in the lounge. She obsessed over the detail. What nightmare forces a boss like Dominic to look at his own wife and fake that kind of calculated cruelty? What the hell was coming for them? She didn't know yet, but she finally had the right question, and that was more than she had when she boarded this doomed flight. By midday, The cloud cover broke just enough to let the sound through. The heavy, distant thud of a chopper running a search grid. Carl snatched the signal mirror from their kit. Serafina grabbed the whistle. 2 other survivors squeezed into the torn fuselage, making as much noise as they possibly could. The chopper swung wide, then corrected. Then it circled back. Serafina stood near the wreckage in the pale mountain light, watching the aircraft drop toward a clearing 200 meters down the ridge. Relief hit her like a physical blow, but it mutated as it settled in, hardened into something much colder, something far quieter than simple relief. She was alive. Whatever Dominic had done, whatever his twisted reasons were, she had boarded the plane he ordered her onto, and nearly died on a Tennessee mountain. She survived, which meant she had to face him again. And when she did, she would demand the truth. Every ugly piece of it. Every cold calculation. Every lie he carefully chose. Every hidden layer that threw her onto flight 892 alone at 2 a.m., completely heartbroken and totally blindsided. She owed herself exactly that much. The chopper finally touched down. Serafina drew a breath that practically shattered her ribs and marched toward it, hundreds of miles away in Chicago. Inside a glass-walled penthouse stamped with his family name, Dominic Viscari stood completely frozen. His phone hung uselessly at his side, his dead eyes locked onto the monitor, watching a live news feed, broadcasting straight from the search zone. His assistant was talking. He heard absolutely nothing. He just stared at the graphic flashing across the screen. Flight 892, missing. He kept running the exact same math he had been grinding through for 20 straight hours. The brutal, endless equations of a mafia boss who built his entire empire on absolute control. The only thing he could not rig was the weather. He shipped her off to keep her breathing. He turned himself into the monster she despised, just so she would leave without a fight. Without demanding answers he could never give. Without making herself a prime target for the vultures circling his syndicate. He ran the numbers, made the call, and executed the hit on his own marriage with ruthless precision. And now, Flight 892 was buried in the Tennessee mountains. 0 confirmed survivors. The woman he systematically destroyed his own soul to protect might actually be dead. All because the universe threw a wild card his syndicate could never anticipate. Then his phone lit up. A secure federal line. The exact same investigator he had been stonewalling for 48 hours. Before putting her on that plane, the Fed who warned him, Serafina Vale was a massive liability to the family. Dominic stared at the caller ID for 3 agonizing rings. Then he shoved the phone face down. He stayed completely paralyzed, hands balled into fists, until his assistant finally snapped his name again. She said his name, Dominic. He snapped around. They found it, she told him. The wreckage on the mountain, and word was there were survivors. He bolted before the sentence even finished. Coat, keys, door, everything else ceased to exist. The feds could wait. His criminal empire could burn to the ground. The massive lie he built to save her did not matter anymore. Only one name on the Flight 892 manifest actually mattered, but Dominic was walking into a trap he never saw coming. When he reached that staging area and watched Serafina step out of the chopper, wearing 3 brutal days of wilderness survival on her face, he would realize something terrifying. The broken girl he sent away had forged herself into titanium, and his Mafia-style protection plan never saw her coming. She was never going to run into his arms. She refused to crumble. Instead, she was going to stare him down across a chaotic Tennessee dirt lot, surrounded by medics and flashing cameras. A massive public scene neither of them could silence, and the look burning inside her eyes was going to be something the boss had never faced in his life. Not love, not hate. Something way past both. A cold fire demanding absolute truth. Dominic Viscari, the untouchable Don, who dictated the terms of every room he ever walked into, was about to learn a brutal lesson. The one space he could never command was the moment Serafina Vale stopped playing the protected wife. The moment she started interrogating the boss. He hit the elevator button. Doors parted. He stepped inside, high above the Tennessee ridges. A chopper banked south, carrying 31 survivors. One of them held bloody gauze to a split eyebrow, completely fixated on the terrifying stillness of her husband's hands. Miles below them, the helicopter slammed down onto a gravel lot, a space freshly flipped into an emergency staging zone 12 hours prior. Folding tables, portable floodlights, a long row of ambulances with their doors thrown wide, federal SUVs jammed together in a frantic, unorganized mess. People swarmed the staging area. Medics moved with the wired, exhausting precision of crews pushed way past their breaking point. Local cops tried holding a flimsy perimeter and completely failed to block 3 news vans already raising satellite dishes by the trees. Serafina stepped out and the freezing air smacked her first. That bitter, sharp mountain wind, tearing through a gray afternoon. Then the deafening noise crashed in. A news camera blasted a spotlight straight at the landing zone. She froze dead in her tracks for 2 full seconds, her shattered nerves desperately trying to process the violent shift. 4 days of blood and burning jet fuel, colliding with this absolute circus. Carl followed close behind. James limped after him, strapped into a makeshift neck brace. The rest of the crew stumbled out in pairs. Medics rushed the pad and caught them. Before the rotors even stopped spinning, a triage nurse in a blue jacket intercepted Serafina's stethoscope, ready asking if she could stand. Serafina told her she was already walking. The nurse just noted the head wound. 4 days old, Serafina muttered, telling her it was not the priority. The medic shot back a grim look, clearly deciding otherwise. Serafina let them steer her toward a folding table, stacked with shock blankets, bottled water, and the grim paperwork of a mass tragedy, clipboards, intake sheets, some exhausted guy hammering away at a laptop, totally desperate to match bleeding faces to flight manifest numbers. She sank onto a metal chair, let the medic inspect her skull, while she downed a bottle of water. She completely ignored the gravel lot, where 20 minutes later, word spread that a heavy Blacktown car had just pulled up. She already felt it. She had figured it out by the second day in the woods, finally given enough silence to dissect his lies. The flawless armor of the dawn had cracked, exposed a truth she could never unsee. It was the kind of instinct you bury, because saying it out loud always demands a brutal price. But guessing his motives from a mountain peak, and feeling his physical presence on the same patch of dirt, were 2 entirely different wars. She was definitely not ready to fight this one. She stared straight ahead. The medic carefully taped her torn brow, gently ordering her to stay absolutely motionless. So she stayed frozen, just glaring at the plastic table, forcing air into her lungs. Then came the crunch of heavy shoes on gravel. Dominic Vescari navigated a crisis completely unlike normal men. She recognized it years ago, but never really had a name for the sickness. The higher the stakes, the slower he walked, as if the icy gears inside the boss only ran smoother under massive pressure. Most guys panicked. They sprinted toward whatever terrified them, just to burn the adrenaline. Dominic held the exact same predatory rhythm, whether he was taking over a rival boardroom or stalking through a disaster zone where his wife had barely cheated death. The heavy footsteps stopped directly behind her. Serafina refused to turn around. Serafina, just one word, her name in his low, gravelly tone. It struck the center of her chest like a sniper round. She absolutely despised it, despised his perfect, calculated strike. She hated that even surrounded by screaming sirens. Her body still violently reacted to Dominic Vescari, reacted in a way her logical brain could not shut down. "Give me another minute," she muttered to the nurse. He said her name a second time. "I heard you," Serafina snapped, staring blankly ahead. "I am not ready yet." Dead silence followed. She felt the dawn, standing there rapidly calculating the odds of forcing her hand. The math took a fraction of a second. He was always dangerously quick. And then the tension broke. He backed off. He waited. The medic finished, phone, patted the tape, and walked off. Serafina finally turned. He looked utterly destroyed. The shock hit her instantly, bypassing all her anger. Dominic Vescari, a man who had never shown weakness in 38 years of ruling the city, looked like a dead man walking, awake for 90 straight hours, starving, ripped apart by the kind of silent, brutal internal hemorrhage that stays entirely hidden until it violently erupts. All at once, his immaculate suit was ruined. She had never seen his clothes so wrecked. The zagados on his jaw was 4 days past deliberate, but his eyes stopped her breathing for a split second. They were entirely exposed. Whatever ruthless shield he normally kept raised had totally collapsed, somewhere between Chicago and this gravel lot. The emotion underneath was so raw, her first instinct was to look away, like witnessing something forbidden, but she forced herself to keep looking. "You are alive," he forced the words out. He stopped, tried again. "Or you don't." She cut him off. He shut his mouth. She stood up. Standing up cost her. Her ribs burned. Her shoulder screamed. It was the physical debt of 4 days surviving, on nothing but adrenaline and freezing mountain air. But she hid the pain. She watched him watch her, watched his muscles tense, fighting the urge to step in and help. He held himself back. He knew reaching for her was a fatal mistake. Good. He still knew how to read a room. "We are not doing this here," she told him. Too many cameras. I have to finish intake. I need to brief the federal coordinator about the passengers. She drew a tight breath. Give me 1 hour. A muscle flexed in his jaw. She saw the math happening behind his eyes, calculating what 1 hour meant, weighing the risk of letting her out of his sight against the danger of pushing her away completely. 1 hour, he agreed. She turned back to the table. Behind her, his footsteps crunched away across the gravel. He was returning to the silent, lethal machinery of men he always kept waiting in the wings. She grabbed the clipboard, signed her name. She completely refused to think about Dominic's eyes. The hour bled away through forced tasks, just enough paperwork to drown out the noise in her head. She briefed the federal coordinator, a hardened woman named Sosa, who treated disaster like a daily routine. They discussed the surviving passengers. They went over Carl's triage work on the mountain. They mapped out the shattered structure of the cabin. She gave an EMT the rundown on the passenger with the head trauma, the one currently in surgery at a Knoxville hospital. She choked down some water. She ate half of whatever protein bar someone shoved into her palm. She kept Dominic out of her head. Then the hour ended. She walked straight to the black SUV at the edge of the lot and climbed in. He was waiting. The heavy scent of him filled the cabin. She had not braced for that. Cedar, starch, and the bitter dark roast he drank every single morning. It hit her like a physical blow. 7 years of violent history, rushing back through her veins. She pressed herself against her door, leaving cold leather between them. She stared straight out the windshield at the tree line. Start talking, she ordered. So he talked. Just not about everything. Not yet. She would realize later he was still playing the boss, managing the flow of intelligence, dripping out facts only as she could handle them. Control was in his bone marrow. He gave her the bare outline, a federal investigation, massive criminal exposure, her own name surfacing in wiretaps he had kept totally buried. He laid out the timeline, explained how fast the net was closing. He recounted a meeting with his attorney, where the word leverage was dropped, but he was holding back. She could feel the omissions like a missing stair in the pitch black, a sudden, dangerous drop where solid ground should be. She let him finish his pitch. Finally, she turned and pinned him with her eyes. What are you hiding? He held her stare. I told you everything. He started. Dominic, she warned. A heavy silence fell. There were threats, he admitted. Specific hits ordered against you. Not just legal leverage. Enemies decided the fastest way to break me was spilling your blood. I had 48 hours to act. Dead quiet filled the car. What kind of threats? She asked. He laid it all out. She sat paralyzed. She focused completely on her own breathing. That exact same cold, deliberate rhythm she forged on the freezing mountain to stay alive. She fell right back into it now. Inhale, exhale, survive. When he finished, she spoke. You should have told me. I could not, he said. You should have told me, she repeated. Her voice was pure steel. I am not a pawn in your syndicate, Dominic. Not some asset you protect in the dark. I chose to build my life around you. And you dismantled me, just because that was more efficient than trusting me. I was trying to keep you breathing, he said. I know. Her tone never wavered. Holding that composure, tore at something deep inside her. I know why you did it. But that is not the point. Then what is? He asked. The point is you played God. You stripped away my right to face my own danger. You fed me a cheap, theatrical lie so I would just walk away blind. She stared down at his hands, perfectly still in his lap. It was that exact same rigid control she had just used to survive the freezing cold. She told him his little trick worked. She bought every single word. She boarded that flight, fully believing the man she loved had simply discarded her. A sudden flinch cracked his mask. The muscle beneath his cheekbone jumped. Then the boss buried it deep. And then I nearly bled out on a mountain, she whispered. The silence that hit the car was suffocating. It was that heavy, pressurized quiet crushes all the air straight out of the room. She listened to the faint, ragged shift in his breathing. To her, it was just pressure. For him, it sounded completely unbearable. I am sorry, he said. She had braced for a lot of things from Dominic Viscari, but not a raw apology. 0 excuses. 0 conditions. Just those 3 words. Completely stripped of every ounce of mobster strategy. She stared at him. He held her gaze. That is not enough, she said. I know, he replied. I do not think enough even exists right now. He didn't fight back. That was entirely new. The syndicate boss she married would have reasoned with her, deployed that cold, calculating logic, fully convinced he could engineer his way out of absolutely any corner. But this man just sat there in dead silence. And that silence was infinitely worse than a shouting match. It meant, he agreed, He finally saw the wreckage he caused, and wasn't even trying to spin it. She turned her eyes back to the glass. "I am going to Miami," she told him. "I have a friend down there. I need to be far away from you, and far from Chicago. Okay, I need time. Okay, I am not making choices about us today. I understand." She grabbed the heavy door handle, then froze. One last thing had to be said, right before her walls slammed firmly back into place. "I thought about you a lot on that mountain." She let the words hang. "I compared the husband I defended for 7 years against the ruthless stranger from the lounge, trying to figure out which one was actually real." He barely breathed. "I think I know the answer," she murmured, "but I do not know if it is good enough." She stepped out into the freezing cold. The next 2 weeks vanished in a hazy blur of sheer trauma. Media helicopters, chasing the survivors of Flight 892. Serafina hid in her friend's Miami apartment, curtains locked tight, phone totally dead. She gave empty statements to the NTSB, fended off federal agents digging for her timeline. Just the agonizing grind of rebuilding a life shattered by her own husband. She barely slept, but she ate well, only because Margot treated trauma with heavy Italian food. Her friend showed up every single morning, carrying something that took 3 hours to simmer. And swallowing Margot's cooking was a lot easier than trying to explain the nightmares that kept her awake. She ran when her bruised ribs finally stopped screaming. At dusk, when the humid air cooled, she paced the waterfront and just let her mind race. Dominic called once every single day. She let it ring. He sent 2 texts. "I am here when you are ready. Take all the time you need." She read the words, tossed the phone on the counter, walked away. She absolutely refused to play the obedient, softening wife, because she wasn't softening. She was processing the betrayal, and processing is a much slower, much uglier reckoning than simply giving in. She finally called Carl to check on his family. He picked up immediately. They burned 40 minutes talking about absolute nonsense. Just 2 survivors avoiding the crash, desperate to prove. The other one was actually still breathing. Right before the line clicked dead, Carl spoke up. "You kept people alive up there." "No, you know that, right? We all did." She told him he organized the whole thing. He said that really mattered. The words echoed long after she hung up. She thought about being useful in a bloodbath when nobody even asked her to. 7 years of being the quiet strategist behind a man who never once admitted he depended on her. She pictured 43 names on a flight manifest, and the 31 who walked off that mountain, still breathing. She remembered exactly what it took to keep them alive for 4 days on 3 medical kits and sheer grit. She was never the liability he assumed she was. On the 15th day, she took a walk, found a bench by the water, and finally faced the brutal truth. She probably knew since day 2 on the mountain, right when the cracks first appeared. She still loved him, and she absolutely hated it. But love wasn't the problem. The issue was the underlying architecture of their marriage. Who held power? Who kept secrets? Who got allowed into which rooms? The real issue was that Dominic built a life where her safety demanded her total ignorance, and she just let him do it, maybe even enabled it. It was simply easier to manage the polished surface, while a mob boss handled the bloody depths. She had been completely complicit in her own exclusion. That realization settled heavy in her chest, an ugly truth that could never be unlearned. She took out her phone, but didn't dial Dominic. She called his attorney, a woman named Hargrove. They had met 4 times in 7 years, and she disliked her for 3 of them. Now she was just grateful she had the number. "Hargrove," she said when the line connected. "I need the full scope of what my husband faces. The federal investigations, the cartel threats, the timeline, absolutely everything. And not from Dominic, from you." A heavy pause hung on the line. Hargrove warned her it was going to be a very long conversation. "I have plenty of time," Serafina replied. It took hours. By the time they finally finished, the waterfront lights were blazing, and Serafina sat completely alone in the dark, the phone resting in her lap. The reality in her head was far uglier and much more complicated than the convenient sketch Dominic had handed her. In the back of that car, he had been telling the truth. She got that part right, but Hargrove, a lawyer practically incapable of sugarcoating syndicate business, handed over the missing pieces. The full federal scope, the actual names of the rival bosses making threats, and one brutal detail that completely shattered everything Serafina had processed over the last 2 weeks. The feds approached Dominic 6 months ago, not 48 hours before he shipped her off to the airport. 6 months. He lived with it for half a year. He sat across from her at dinner, slept in their bed, and managed the polished surface of their life for 6 entire months, while carrying this massive secret. And she had absolutely no idea. None. He was so clean about the cover-up, she never even felt the tension shift. For 6 months, she was the only one actually present in their marriage. She sat in the dark with that heavy betrayal. Then she dialed his number. He answered on the first ring. "I talked to Hargrove," she said. The heavy silence on the line belonged to a boss who understood exactly what that meant. 6 months. She pushed. "You have known for 6 entire months." "Yes. And you didn't tell me." "I was trying to figure out how," he replied. Her voice dropped to a dead quiet. The kind of quiet that was infinitely worse than screaming. "Do not give me that. You had 6 months to figure it out. Instead, you chose to keep your mouth shut until time ran out. And then you just shoved me onto a plane." He stayed completely silent. "I need you to hear me clearly," she warned. "I can understand a man making ruthless choices under impossible pressure. I can understand the lounge. I can almost grasp the sheer cruelty of it, given what rival cartel you were trying to shield me from. But 6 months of locking me out of my own life. Never." She took a slow, steadying breath. "You didn't protect me from the danger, Dominic. You just forced me to live blindly beside it while you played God alone." "I know. Do you?" Yes, his voice was raw, ragged. Broken sound she had never heard from him before. "I know what I did. I have sat with this for 2 weeks, and I have absolutely no excuse. I have reasons," he admitted, "but I know the difference." She pressed her back hard against the wooden bench. Above her, the Miami skyline just kept glowing. That bruised orange-black of a coastal city at night. The neon pollution, rendering the clouds almost beautiful. "I am coming to Chicago," she told him. "Not to come home. Not yet, but I need to hear everything. Not the sanitized version you curate for my benefit. Absolutely everything." The texture of his silence shifted. After 7 years, she was an absolute expert at reading his quiet. This silence belonged to a man who had prayed for a door to stay firmly closed. Now he was watching it swing open. Terrified of what stood on the other side. 2 days, he finally agreed. "Okay," she hung up. She stayed on that bench for 20 more minutes, just staring at the dark water. She remembered her own words to him in the back of the car. "I do not know if enough exists." She still did not know. But she was realizing the real issue wasn't whether a betrayal like this could be forgiven. The question was whether the new version of their marriage, the one where she held the bloody secrets and walked into the dangerous rooms herself, instead of being kept outside, was a structure that could actually hold 2 people. She was heading back to Chicago to finally find out. But she didn't know what was waiting for her inside the massive skyscraper bearing his name. She wouldn't realize until she forced open those boardroom doors that the 6-month federal probe Hargrove mentioned was not the only devastating secret Dominic had buried in the dark. There was one more missing piece. One fatal choice he made before any of this syndicate war even started, burning quietly in the background like a slow fuse. It was about to detonate right there in that boardroom, because while she was stuck hiding in Miami, the federal investigation had moved far faster than anyone anticipated, and now it was finally going to ignite. She hit Chicago on a Tuesday morning. The sky hung like old concrete. That freezing lake wind had enough teeth to bite through 2 layers of wool. This territory felt entirely different than it had just 3 weeks ago. Or maybe she was the one who changed. The city kept doing what it always did, massive, indifferent, and churning at its own brutal velocity. It really did not give a damn whose empire was bleeding out on the pavement. Dominic's armored town car idled at arrivals. She almost grabbed a cab out of pure spite. But that kind of petty rebellion would only drain the energy she desperately needed for the impending bloodletting. She climbed in. The driver stayed completely silent, watching the brutalist geometry of the expressway blur past. She obsessed over what Hargrove said, and what the lawyer deliberately left out. She kept replaying that specific, heavy pause, right after she asked if there was anything else she should know, before flying back. Hargrove had answered, "I think that is a conversation for you and Dominic." That pause, a careful, calculated deflection from a man who dealt in precision language and never wasted a single syllable. Serafina had filed it away for 2 days. It just festered in the back of her skull, quiet, patient, and getting terrifyingly heavier by the hour. Then the monolithic headquarters finally loomed up through the tinted glass. She always had a complicated relationship with this building. The way his name scarred the skyline in cold steel letters. That lobby felt like a physical threat, every single surface chosen by someone who understood how to project absolute power. Before a word was even spoken, she had walked across that black marble hundreds of times. Never once questioned the violent language it was speaking. She questioned it now. The private elevator fired her up to the 42nd floor. His assistant, a composed kid named Elliot, who mastered the art of seeing everything while staying entirely invisible, met her at the doors. He warned her Dominic was already in the boardroom, alongside two unexpected guests she really needed to know about. Serafina stopped dead in her tracks. "Who?" she demanded. "Hargrove," Elliot replied, "and a federal investigator. Agent Daria Wren. She walked in 40 minutes ago." He paused. She watched the kid carefully calibrate exactly how much intel to hand over. It was not scheduled. Serafina took the hit. Did Dominic know she was coming? He was informed the second she cleared lobby security. Serafina let that settle for the 3 seconds it took to make her choice. Then she shoved past Elliot, marched straight toward the glass boardroom, and pushed inside without knocking. 2 walls overlooked the sprawling city and a sky threatening heavy rain. Dominic stood rigid at the far end of the mahogany table. He refused to sit. His body had already figured out that sitting down was no longer an option in whatever nightmare was currently unfolding. Hargrove flanked his left with a legal pad, wearing the grim expression of a consigliere managing an active war. Across the table sat a woman in her early 40s. Short dark hair, unnatural stillness. Not peacefulness, pure, sustained professional discipline. A federal predator who learned to make herself completely unreadable just to survive these rooms. Agent Wren glanced up as Serafina walked in. A quick flicker crossed her features assessment. Recalibration then vanished entirely. Dominic turned sharp. "I had no idea she was coming," he said right away. "I know," Serafina replied. "Elliot told me." She locked eyes with Wren. "Why are you here?" "Because the timeline moved up," Wren answered. "What timeline?" Wren shot a look at Dominic. Dead silence. Hargrove held his pen completely motionless over the yellow paper. Beyond the glass, the city sprawled out below them, massive, indifferent, just doing what cities do. "Sit down, Miss Vale," Wren offered. "I will stand." Wren studied her for a second, then gave a slow nod, like that was the exact answer she expected. She flipped open the folder, spun it around, and slid it across the mahogany toward Serafina. Glossy surveillance photos. The first showed an industrial warehouse, entirely stripped of identifying markers. The second was a heavily redacted wire transfer. The third shot caught Dominic through a telephoto lens on some unfamiliar street, deep in conversation with a man whose face was completely blurred out. Serafina just stared down at the scattered glossies. Then her eyes shifted to Dominic. His jaw locked into that specific set she recognized instantly. It was not anger, not defense. It was the face of a boss who ran the grim math, found an unchangeable answer, and was figuring out how to survive the blast. "Tell me," she demanded. 3 years ago, he said, "I made a deal." The confession just hung in the dead air. "Before we took the Lakeshore apartment," he continued, "way before the Miami project. Before any of the last 3 years of this life we built together." He choked on the sentence, then forced it out anyway. "A guy named Carver approached me with an offer. I was bleeding cash, growing way too fast. 2 massive developments were tanking. I needed hard liquidity, a lot faster than any clean bank would ever approve." He stared right at her, refusing to flinch. She knew that took everything he had. Carver brought money that looked perfectly clean on paper, but the actual source was pure dirt, and I knew it when I signed. She barely recognized her own hoarse voice asking how much. "Enough to stop the bleeding," he replied. 40 million over 18 months. And the source. His jaw tightened. Trafficking. Nothing direct. Carver handled the wash. "But the dirty origin of those funds stop," she snapped. He shut his mouth. Her heart pounded against her ribs, just like back on the mountain. Right when the plane engines whined, and her body sensed the drop before her brain even processed the danger. That pure animal panic. A primal, physical warning screaming through her blood way faster than mere words could ever travel. She stared at the open folder, dropped her gaze to that surveillance shot of Dominic, then finally looked at her husband. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew exactly where the cash came from." "Yes, from the very beginning." "Yes." Dead quiet swallowed the office whole. Hargrove kept his pen frozen in place. Wren simply watched Serafina, with the cold patience of a seasoned federal agent, totally aware that the next 30 seconds were not the time to say a single word. "I have stood beside you at every single gala, every ribbon cutting, every dinner for 3 years, Serafina said. I smiled, shook hands, and played the perfect Mafia wife for the cameras. And I did it all funded by blood money. She choked on a sharp breath, then pushed forward. "You made me an accessory to a crime I never chose, never knew about, and could never walk away from, because you stole my right to say no." That is entirely correct, Dominic replied. His tone was perfectly steady. God, she despised him for it right then. Despised his calm. Despised his unbending composure. Despised that the ruthless machinery of his self-control never shut down. Say it again. That is correct. Every word you just said is true. And I will not sugarcoat it. She grabbed the folder, gripping it so hard the cardboard creased. Then she slammed it back down, just to keep her trembling hands from throwing the damn thing across the room. She felt Wren tracking her movements, felt Hargrove staring, too. Behind them, the rain finally broke steady drops, lashing the glass, slicing down the massive windows in thin, watery scars. What does the agent want? Serafina demanded, glaring at Wren. Wren leaned in. Your husband has been actively cooperating with our federal investigation for 8 solid weeks now. Since the timeline just exploded, we need his formal statement on the cash flow. The $40 million, the shell accounts, and any hard proof tying back to Carver's syndicate that Mr. Viscari can hand over, if he plays ball completely. His prison exposure on this money laundering count drops drastically. We will not erase the charges, but he avoids a life sentence. And if he refuses, Wren kept a deadpan expression. Then we bring the hammer down. The exposure on every single count, including those 3 years of operations, built on syndicate cash, gets exponentially worse. Serafina shot a look at Dominic. 8 weeks, she echoed. You have been talking to the feds for 8 weeks. Yes, way before you shoved me toward that airport, yes. And you kept that a secret, too. His jaw tightened again. I refuse to put you in the middle of. I am already in the middle of it, she cut in. That deadly quiet in her tone hit harder than any scream. I have lived in the blast radius this entire time. I just had no idea the bomb was ticking under my feet, and that is a hell of a lot different than being safe. It just means I have been playing in traffic blindfolded. Miss Vale, Wren interjected. Serafina snapped her attention back to the agent. I need to make one thing perfectly clear, Wren stated. Your husband came to the Bureau on his own. That matters. He launched this. We never blackmailed him into flipping. He walked right through our doors, took a seat, and served up Carver's entire underworld operation, just to secure a structured plea deal. She paused. I have worked organized crime for 16 years. Crime bosses in his chair never do that. They lawyer up, they stonewall the grand jury, and they pray the prosecution bleeds out. Dominic broke the mold. Why the hell are you telling me this? Serafina asked. Because you are owed the ugly truth, Wren replied. And because whatever goes down in the next 72 hours relies heavily on decisions your husband cannot make alone. A heavy beat. What kind of decisions? Serafina asked. Wren glanced at Dominic. A heavy loaded look passed between them. The real hook. It was exactly why the feds showed up today, instead of next month. Carfar downed out I flipped, Dominic said over the drumming rain. How? Serafina demanded. We have no idea yet. We have a rat somewhere in the federal pipeline, Wren admitted. We are hunting the leak. But Carver caught wind roughly 72 hours ago. Which means the syndicate is making moves. Serafina finished. Exactly. What kind of moves? The brutal kind, Wren said. He is permanently silencing anyone who can verify those dirty financial ledgers. The agent delivered the threat, with bone-chilling calm. Serafina instantly decoded the warning, tapping right into the dark, bloody architecture of the Mafia world she had blindly slept next to. Reducing the number of people, she slowly turned toward Dominic. He was staring back with a raw, shattered expression she had never once seen on his face. Gone was his usual boardroom mask. Gone was the sheer panic from the rescue staging area. This was utter surrender. He had completely stopped trying to manage the fallout, sitting there totally unguarded, a dying king, who finally ran out of walls to hide behind. Who is on Carver's hit list? She asked. Her voice echoed strangely in her own head. Only 3 people can officially verify those dirty ledgers, Wren stated. We threw 2 of them into protective custody. The third, she hesitated. The third, Serafina pressed. The third target is a woman named Petra Solano. Dominic leaned forward. She cooked the books for 18 months, holding the digital master file that ties Carver's gang to my original dirty loan. He swallowed hard. And she kept a shadow ledger I only discovered last week. Private records Carver has no idea even exist. If those files ever hit a grand jury, they will completely dismantle Carver's empire going back 11 years. Where is she right now? Serafina demanded. Dominic held her gaze for a heavy, agonizing second. Petra sent out a distress signal 4 days ago. She went deep underground, he explained. She refuses to let the feds lock her up, because she knows their system is compromised. Carver already ordered hits on 2 other cartel insiders hiding in federal safe houses. Both of those protective details harbored the exact same rat that ruined my deal. But this bookkeeper trusts you, Serafina realized. Just enough to ping my burner phone. So she is out in the open, yes. And if Carver's hitmen slice her throat before we get those flash drives, our entire RICO case crumbles, Wren added. Which means Mr. Viscari loses his bargaining chip and goes straight to federal prison. The brutal math clicked into place inside Serafina's head with a terrifying, crystal clear logic she really did not want. A terrified woman running solo. A smoking gun that could nuke an 11-year Mafia reign. A corrupted federal task force. 72 ticking hours. She stared straight into Dominic's eyes. You have to pull her out first, she told him. I definitely need to grab her. He agreed. But I need someone she actually trusts to lure her out. He hesitated, dreading the next sentence. She will not break cover for me. Not after the feds leaked. She refuses to meet any men from my crew. 2 previous extraction attempts smelled like setups, and she vanished both times. He swallowed the silence. I told Petra about you. The walls felt like they were closing in. Dominic Hargrove murmured. A quiet warning. But Dominic kept watching Serafina. You told her about me, Serafina said, the words falling heavy. I told her exactly who you are, Dominic answered, his voice steady. What you did up on that mountain. The kind of woman you are. She asked to speak with you. The silence that followed dragged out long enough for the rain to batter a new pattern against the glass. Standing in the center of the room, Serafina realized she was anchored deep inside the exact life she had been told she was. Outside of for 7 entire years. She was never outside this crime family. Not really. You dragged me back here just to ask for my help, she said. No, Dominic replied. I brought you back here to give you the truth. All of it. Everything. What you do with the facts is entirely up to you. He held her stare. It has always been your decision. I just took way too long to understand that. She shifted her focus to Wren. If I actually meet with this woman, she asked, and she hands over the mob ledgers. What does that mean for him? It really depends on the paperwork. Wren answered carefully. Best case scenario, reduced charges, a structured plea, maybe even 0 prison time. But that depends entirely on the judge and the full scope of his cooperation. She hesitated. Nothing is guaranteed. Worst case is 3 to 5 years in minimum security, with complete cooperation and the Solano files in hand. The absolute worst federal penalties drop out of the picture completely. 3 to 5 years. That number hung heavy in the room, everyone weighing the cost. Serafina finally turned away to face the window. The rain lashed harder now. The city sprawled below them, totally gray and wet and alive. Thousands of people, down there grinding through their normal days, completely oblivious to the Mafia drama, unfolding in a glass room, 42 floors above the street. She thought about her own words on that Miami bench. I do not know if enough remains. She pictured Petra Solano, a woman alone out there in the cold, clutching records that could completely crush a massive crime syndicate. The clock was ticking down on whether a friend would reach her before the cartel hitman did. She thought about the 31 survivors trapped on that freezing mountain. The girl trembling in the back of the cabin, crying so quietly. She remembered the brutal, desperate system she built from absolute scratch just to keep those people breathing. She thought about 7 entire years of standing, right beside a man she deeply loved, while he systematically locked her out of his true, bloody reality. She turned back around. Dominic was watching her. Hargrove was watching her. Wren was watching her. The rain slapped the glass with a hard, rhythmic strike, almost a pattern, almost a pulse you could steer by. Give me her contact details, Serafina demanded. Dominic went completely rigid. I am not doing this for you, she told him. I am doing this because a woman trapped alone, with a mob target on her back, deserves someone who knows exactly how that feels. She stared him down. And when this ends, when Petra Solano is sitting safely with Agent Wren, and the ledgers are secure, and the timer stops, we are going to talk about every single year of this marriage. You will not manage it. You will not curate my reactions, and you are not going to decide what I can handle anymore. She let the silence stretch. Are we clear? Yes, Dominic replied quietly. I absolutely mean it. I know you do. She shifted her eyes to Wren. I need a burner phone that Carver's enforcers cannot track, she said. And I need every shred of background intel you have on Solano before I reach out. And I need to know right now if your federal leak has been caught, because I refuse to walk blindly into a crossfire, just because your chain of command is compromised. The phone Agent Wren handed over was a fresh burner, completely clean number. zero registered identity. It was a cold, untraceable device that existed strictly as a conduit and absolutely nothing else. Riding the elevator down, she weighed the cheap plastic in her palm. She studied the contact number, written in Ren's sharp handwriting on a torn slip of paper. She thought about what it really meant to call a desperate stranger, asking her to trust a voice on the line, armed with nothing but the backing of a crime boss. She already had every reason to fear. This is exactly what Dominic does, she realized. He moves people like pawns. But then she caught herself. No, he moves pieces in the dark. Right now, I am making my own choice. That distinction mattered. She did not know how much yet, but it mattered. She placed the call from the massive lobby, standing right by the street-facing window, watching the heavy rain drown the pavement and the pedestrians scurrying past, with their heads bowed against the wind. It rang 4 times before a voice answered, low, cautious. It was the absolute guardedness of someone answering an unknown number, with every single survival instinct flaring. Who is this? My name is Serafina Vale, she replied. I am Dominic's wife. I understand you asked to speak with me. The pause on the line stretched out, thick and heavy enough to physically feel. He finally told you, Petra murmured. He told me enough that I flew straight back from Miami to handle this myself. Serafina kept her tone perfectly flat. I am not here to convince you to do anything. I am here because a woman in deep trouble reached out for help. And I know exactly how that isolation feels. The line went silent again. You were on that plane, Petra said softly. Yes, I saw the news. That mountain, a heavy breath shuddered through the phone. You kept those people breathing. Well, some of them. That counts for something. No, Serafina agreed quietly. It is not nothing. The rain pounded the glass. Behind her in the lobby, 2 corporate suits energetically debated a merger, living completely blind to the life and death stakes unfolding 10 feet away. Petra insisted they meet face to face. No federal buildings, and absolutely nowhere connected to her husband's Mafia turf or his properties. Where then? Petra rattled off an address, a gritty coffee shop down in Pilsen on the south side. It was the kind of block where heavy foot traffic made 2 women chatting completely invisible. 2 hours, Serafina promised. I will be there. She killed the call, walked straight upstairs, and gave Agent Ren the location. She watched the agent run 3 tactical calculations in 4 seconds flat before giving a single stiff nod. Ren promised to scatter undercover units across the area. Not inside the cafe, totally out of sight, but close enough to strike if Carver's men showed up. Serafina understood the stakes. She did not fight it. She grasped the brutal geometry of this mob war, well enough to know she could not afford to reject reasonable protection. Dominic was still waiting in the glass room when she walked back in. He looked up, the question burning clear across his face. She outlined the meeting she just arranged. Dominic stayed completely silent for a tense second. Then he declared he was coming with her. No, Serafina shot back. She will vanish the second you show your face. You know that. You told me that yourself. His jaw clenched hard. I am not letting you walk alone into danger. You do not let me do anything. She cut him off. Her voice was quiet, direct. That was the entire point of the conversation we literally just had. You do not get to dictate my risk tolerance anymore. She held his stare without blinking. Ren's tactical team will hold the perimeter. I have the burner phone. I know the address. And I know exactly what I am walking into. She grabbed her coat off the chair. Stand down. The command hit him hard. She watched him swallow it, fighting his natural urge to dominate against the bitter realizations of what controlling her would finally cost him. She watched his alpha instinct completely break. Just call me when you get inside, he muttered. I will call you when I am safely out, she corrected. While I am in there, I have to be fully present. She walked out before he could fire back another word. The cab ride to Pilsen took 22 minutes through flooded streets. Sitting in the back, staring out at the gray blur, she mentally filed through everything Agent Ren had dug up on Petra Solano. 36 years old, former forensic accountant. She had been buried deep inside Carver's shady financial operations for 3 long years before she actually realized where the dirty money was flowing from. But she did not just run when she found out. Instead, she started secretly copying the books. Over 18 grueling months, she assembled a ledger that was either the most brilliant financial forensics Agent Ren had ever verified, or the deadliest hit list a civilian ever built in the state of Illinois. It just depended on who was holding the gun. A woman who quickly learned that her only real armor in a mafia war was hard evidence. Serafina completely understood that survival instinct. The coffee shop ended up being a cramped dive on a street corner. It was filled with mismatched chairs, cheap local art, and a counter run by exhausted baristas who clearly held strong opinions about every single regular who walked in. The air smelled like burnt espresso and damp wool coats. Serafina scanned the crowded room instantly. She spotted Petra tucked into a dark back booth, directly facing the door. An untouched coffee sat in front of her. Both hands rested flat on the table, the deliberate, careful posture of prey trying incredibly hard to look harmless. Serafina slid into the booth across from her. They just looked at each other. Petra Solano had sharp, dark eyes that darted with the hyperspeed of pure survival, not just nervous anxiety. It was the deep vigilance of someone who had been hunted for so long that paranoia was simply her normal heartbeat. She looked alarmingly frail, thinned out by months of sheer terror and forgetting to eat. A nasty bruise painted her left jaw, 4 or 5 days old, fading to a sickly yellow around the edges. She was swallowed up by an oversized jacket that screamed, borrowed clothing. "Someone hit you," Serafina pointed out gently. "Carver's first extraction team," Petra replied. "6 days ago. I managed to slip away." She delivered the horror with dead, flat eyes proving she had already burned through the screaming panic, coming out the other side into something terrifyingly cold and functional. "You look like your photos," Petra said, her hands wrapped around a cold coffee. "I want to know why you are really here." "I told you on the phone," Serafina replied. "That was a version." Petra pushed back. "I want the truth." Serafina met her gaze dead on. "My husband spent 3 years dragging me into his syndicate without my knowledge. Being trapped in a lethal situation blind that happened to me too. And now, I am sitting across from the one woman holding the ledgers that can burn Carver's operation to the ground. The federal clock is ticking, and here you are, sitting alone with a bruised jaw, wearing someone else's jacket. Someone has to bridge the gap between here and safety. I can be that bridge." Petra stared at her. "He does not deserve you. That is an entirely different conversation," Serafina replied. "Are you coming in?" Petra hesitated. "I need guarantees Ren cannot give me." "What kind?" "The federal leak," Petra said. "They found it," Serafina told her. "Ren confirmed it 2 hours ago, before I even left the building. It was a paralegal in the U.S. Attorney's office. Compromised through family. He has been stripped of his clearance and isolated completely from the main investigation." She watched Petra closely. "Ren wanted you to know this came from her, not Dominic's crew." Something shifted in Petra's eyes. Not relief. Something much colder. A quiet recalculation. "If I hand over the ledgers," Petra asked slowly, "and Carver's entire network burns, what happens to me?" "Witness protection is on the table," Serafina said. "A new identity. Relocation. The whole federal infrastructure. I have a sister in Portland," Petra whispered. "Talk to Ren about that, but family arrangements are possible." Serafina kept her voice completely steady. "Petra, how long have you been running?" Dead silence. 11 months. Serafina thought about her own 4 days, trapped on a mountain, and the brutal toll it took. Then she multiplied that agony across nearly a year of living like an absolute ghost. She looked at Petra, feeling a profound, heavy understanding that went way beyond pity. "It is time to stop running," she said. Petra stared at her hands, then the door, then back. You could see the math happening behind her eyes. Not sloppy, just stark. The final exhausted choice of a woman who had simply run out of road. "Okay, how do we do this?" 4 blocks away, walking toward Ren's staged car, Serafina's burner buzzed. "It is Ren," she told Petra, answering the call. "Move faster." Ren snapped. A vehicle pulled up 20 minutes ago. 2 guys watching the coffee shop. Serafina kept her pace steady, her voice dead low. "How did they find the location?" "Working on it. Keep moving. Do not run. The car is on Halstead. Blue sedan. Torres is driving. Get in and do not stop." Serafina killed the call, never breaking her stride. "We need to move," she warned. Petra read her expression and asked 0 questions. That alone proved what 11 months of pure survival had done to her instincts. She adjusted her pace instantly, scanning the street without moving her head. They took the corner, and the rain hit them directly. Wind whipped fiercely between the concrete blocks. Serafina felt the freezing damp bite into her shoulder, waking up the old mountain injury with a miserable ache. She kept moving. Halfway down the block, she spotted the exact sedan Ren described. The car idled up ahead on the right, its exhaust curling softly into the downpour. That was Torres. She stepped toward it, then heard the distinct, violent slam of a car door right behind them, heavy boots hitting wet asphalt, the kind of rushing footsteps that meant only one thing. She grabbed Petra's arm and bolted. The sedan was 30 feet away. 2 sets of heavy footsteps surged up right behind them. A man barked a sharp, clipped command to his partner. Serafina felt her bruised ribs and bad shoulder scream in absolute protest, mentally deciding exactly how much of that agony she could afford to feel right now. Torres kicked the back door open. Before they even reached it, she shoved Petra inside, diving in right after her. Torres gunned the engine while the door was still swinging shut. Looking out the back glass, she watched Carver's 2 hitters halt on the pavement, dead still. They knew they had just missed their shot. One hitter was already on his phone, calling it in. Serafina sank back into the leather and took a breath. Beside her, Petra was panting. Her hands trembled violently, though she made no effort to hide it, which somehow made the panic seem manageable. "We are okay," Serafina told her. "How do you do that?" Petra asked. "Do what? Sound like you actually mean it." Serafina thought about keeping 31 people calm on a frozen mountain by speaking absolute conviction into thin air. "Practice," she murmured. Torres drove them to a secure federal house in Bridgeport. Not an office and off-the-books, secondary site Wren controlled. Wren was already waiting inside. The tracking data gave her just enough time to beat them there. The safe house smelled like dark roast and old timber carrying that heavy, lived-in vibe of a place, hosting far too many nervous witnesses over the years. Wren stared at Petra. Petra stared back. Serafina simply stepped aside. For the next 90 minutes, she sat totally alone at a kitchen table. She nursed a black coffee, listening to the heavy rain and the muffled interrogation next door. She did not try to eavesdrop. That was not her war. She was the bridge. Petra had finally crossed over. She dialed Dominic, who picked up before the first ring even finished. "I am clear," she said. "Petra is with Wren." He let out a ragged breath, the most unguarded sound he had ever made, a massive release of pure, terrible tension. Just a boss finally given permission to breathe. "You are okay?" he asked. "I am fine." "And Petra, safe with Wren." She paused. "Dominic, we had a tail. They found the location." His tone went instantly to ice. "How, I do not know yet," she said. "Wren handled it." She stared at the table. "Dominic, those documents. Wren says they expose 11 years of Carver's financial empire. Did you know that?" A heavy pause stretched over the line. "I knew she had records," he said carefully, "but I never grasped the massive scope until Wren called me this morning. If those files are real, it destroys Carver completely. And you, dead silence. And you, Dominic." She demanded. "My exposure becomes manageable," he answered carefully, "with my full cooperation. Hargrove thinks we can negotiate a structured plea deal, reduced charges, maybe even 0 time. He stopped. "It is not a guarantee, but it is possible." "Yes." She watched rain streak the kitchen glass, gravity pulling every single drop toward the jagged edge. "I need you to understand something," she told him coldly. "Tell me this actually works for you. If Carver goes down, you take that plea deal, and we somehow survive this mess. That is not the end of our conversation." She kept her tone absolute. "That is just the beginning. We are dissecting the last 7 years. Every solo move that should have been ours. Every single room you locked me out of. Every version of protection you sold me. That was really just syndicate control." She paused. "I refuse to rebuild a marriage on that toxic foundation. I will never live inside that cage again." The line went totally dead. She just heard rain echoing through the speaker. "I know," he whispered. "Do you even want to rebuild it?" she asked. "Give me an honest answer. Not the spin that serves your syndicate right now. The absolute truth." Another heavy silence. She pictured him standing alone in his tower, completely stripped of his armor, a broken boss sifting through his own wreckage. "Yes," he rasped. "I want to rebuild it. I have no idea how to be different, but I want to try. And wanting to try does not give me the right to ask you to wait." She closed her eyes. "Most honest thing you have said in years." "I know." The door opened. Wren walked out with Petra close behind. The Fed looked like someone who had chased ghosts for 16 years, and finally caught the devil himself. "We have everything," Wren announced. Serafina just looked at her. "Petra's files hand us 11 years of clean financial forensics on Carver's entire syndicate." Wren laid it out: accounts, shell companies, wire transfers, fronts. She stopped. "We hit Carver's crew tonight. 6 locations simultaneously." She held Serafina's gaze. "Your husband's cooperation plus these ledgers gives Hargrove the exact structured resolution he negotiated. I make that call in an hour." Serafina studied Petra. The woman just stood there, arms folded, eyes completely dry, wearing the face of somebody who took the worst option left and somehow survived the fallout. Thank you, Serafina told her. Petra met her stare. You walked out into the rain for a stranger. You hid those ledgers for 11 months to protect people you will never meet. We are dead even, Serafina replied. Petra's mouth twitched. Not a smile. Just a faint shadow of one, a quiet acknowledgement. Sometime later, when I finally have the energy, I will feel this properly. Serafina understood that completely. She left the burner on the table and grabbed her own phone. 3 unread texts from Dominic in the last 30 minutes. She ignored them for now. Turning back to Ren, she asked, when your strike teams hit Carver's territory tonight, what is the fallout risk for Dominic? Ren answered carefully. An operation like this always carries blowback. But Carver will be scrambling to save his own Mafia infrastructure tonight. He will not be chasing loose ends. Once the federal warrants drop, the immediate threat to your husband drops with them. She stopped. The real danger right now is to my agents in the field. If one synchronized raid leaks, the whole takedown collapses. She stared straight at Serafina. Go back to your husband. Stay put with him tonight, and let my task force do the dirty work. Serafina gave a stiff nod. She phoned a cab from that quiet Bridgeport kitchen while the rain hammered the roof. Out there in the dark, federal agents were already slipping into parking lots, staking out corners, holding static surveillance lines, hundreds of operatives, finally cashing in on years of agonizing prep for this exact night. She sank into the back seat of the cab as it pushed north through slick, rain-soaked streets. Her mind raced, over Ren's warnings, over Dominic's promises, over the haunting image of Petra backed into a coffee shop corner, keeping both hands flat on the table so nobody got nervous. 11 brutal months dodging cartel hitmen, 4 grueling days trapped on a mountain. She thought about the ragged way Dominic had exhaled when she finally told him she was done running. The cab rolled to a stop outside his high-rise. She stepped out into the biting rain, staring up at the massive steel letters bearing his family name. A profound shift settled deep in her ribs. It was not forgiveness. It was not surrender. It felt structural. A quiet verdict handed down below the level of conscious thought, forged by the buried part of her soul that had been quietly bleeding while her conscious mind played tactical chess. She pushed through the glass doors. He was already waiting. Right there in the main lobby, not hiding upstairs in some executive suite. He stood by the same glass window, where she had first called Petra hours earlier. He wore the exact same tailored suit. Only now the fabric was hopelessly crushed, the dark stubble on his jaw thickening. His hands hung perfectly still at his sides, that tense, coiled mob boss posture she knew intimately. His eyes locked onto her the second she cleared the revolving doors. She crossed the marble floor, letting the terrible distance shrink, until she stopped barely 2 feet from his chest. She studied his face, every ruined edge of it. It was the same raw, totally shattered man she had seen at the rescue compound. The armor had not completely slid back into place. She held her tongue. He stayed silent too. There was just the heavy rhythm of rain lashing the towering windows. Above them loomed 42 floors of a criminal enterprise currently bleeding out, waiting to be gutted and rebuilt into something legitimate. Down here at Ground Zero, 2 exhausted people stood inches apart, standing in a building stamped with his family legacy, surrounded by the absolute wreckage of their marriage, with 0 promises about tomorrow. Ren ordered me to be somewhere with you tonight. She admitted. Okay, he rasped. I am not forgiving you right now, she warned him. Do not mistake this for that. I know, but I am not walking away either. A nameless, agonizing grief flickered across his eyes. She did not try to untangle it. Instead, she pivoted toward the private elevator. He matched her stride. The doors slid wide. They stepped inside. The elevator cab shot upward, leaving the marble lobby far below. Serafina kept her gaze drilled into the steel doors, suffocating under the sheer mass of the last 24 hours. Petra's battered jaw, the terrifying thud of cartel boots on slick asphalt. Ren's icy relief when she announced they finally had the ledger. Dominic's broken exhale over the wiretap. She fully grasped that the damage was permanent. The road back was terrifying. Absolutely nothing would be magically fixed by dawn. And yet, out there in the rain, tactical units were currently kicking down doors at 6 Mafia fronts, and the cartel boss, standing barely 18 inches from her shoulder, was finally out of lies to feed her. The cab dinged on the 42nd floor. They stepped into the dead, heavy quiet of a high-rise after midnight. It was a textured kind of silence, just the low hum of the vents, the muted roar of traffic bleeding through bulletproof glass, and the sterile clicking of motion sensors illuminating the hallway as they walked. Dominic's executive suite anchored the end of the corridor. He slid the keycard, holding the heavy oak door so she could cross the threshold first. He kept totally quiet. He left the blinding overheads dark, snapping on a single brass lamp over the credenza. It cast an amber glow, shrinking the vast, intimidating syndicate war room into something incredibly intimate. She sank onto the leather sofa against the wall. He took the low chair across from her, not his massive boss's chair. He took the one he chose when he refused to let a mahogany desk shield him from an enemy. She had seen him use that exact psychological tactic on rival crews before. She knew exactly what kind of vulnerability it signaled. Heavy silence filled the office. Rain pelted the reinforced glass. Down below, the sprawling city remained an endless grid of brake lights, entirely blind to the war breaking out in its shadows. Somewhere out there, federal breach teams were ramming doors, executing the massive sting operation Ren had orchestrated. Dominic and Serafina could not track it, could not stop it. They could only sit there, trapped together, waiting to see what the fallout would cost them. "Tell me about Carver," she demanded. He looked up. "I don't want the rehearsed spin you fed the feds," she pushed. "I want the blood and bone truth. Who he really was when he approached you. Exactly how it felt to shake the devil's hand." He sat perfectly still. She watched Tim strip away that slick corporate defense, watched him bypass the standard mob alibis, peeling back every single layer until he hit the ugly, indefensible core. "I was 34, he rasped, "Dad. I built this empire out of dirt, stretched my leverage way too thin, and suddenly the foundation started fracturing. It wasn't a total collapse, just a slow, terrifying bleed." He stared right down at his empty palms. "A mutual associate brought Carver to my table at a summit. The man was pure velvet. He used elite corporate phrasing, wore the right suits, pitched me on rapid capital liquidity and discreet bridge loans. I grilled him, and his answers were flawlessly insulated. He swallowed hard. I ran the background checks myself, found the clean shell companies, and I deliberately let that illusion be enough, because I was just that desperate." "You knew that cash was filthy," she accused. "I strongly suspected the margins were shady," he corrected. "There is a legal difference, and I convinced myself that difference actually mattered." He met her eyes. It was an absolute joke. The cash flowed. The bleeding stopped. My territory expanded. Carver morphed from a quick loan into a permanent partner. Every passing year pulled the snare tighter. Unwinding him became impossible. Looking the other way became my default setting. He broke off. "So that is the raw truth. What exactly were you refusing to look at?" She pressed him say the words out loud. A muscle jumped in his jaw. He didn't blink. That his seed money was soaked in blood. That right underneath my pristine financial scaffolding, I was tethered to a cartel that trafficked human beings like cheap cargo. He delivered the confession without dodging the strike. I brainwashed myself into thinking the buffer was thick enough. I was 5 layers removed from the street-level violence, so the rot couldn't possibly infect my soul. His voice cracked. "I swallowed that poison every single morning for 3 years. Rain lashed the glass. The amber light suffocated the room. So why drag Ren into it?" she asked. "Because 18 months ago, I unearthed ledgers hidden inside my own private servers. Carver had hijacked my clean corporate accounts to wash his darkest cash behind my back. He infected the very heart of my operation." He locked onto her stare. "The bastard made me a silent accomplice to hits and rackets I would never have sanctioned in a million years. The second I uncovered the truth, I realized my precious buffer was just a total myth. There was no path forward that didn't leave my hands completely stained with blood." He swallowed hard. "So I approached Ren for a deal. And you still kept me totally in the dark." She fired back. "Yes, why?" He studied her, the heavy silence stretching out. "Because confessing meant showing you the monster I had actually become," he whispered. "Not the polished husband you married. The coward who took cartel money and played ignorant." He stopped. "I was afraid of what you'd do when you finally saw it." She let that sit. "You thought I'd run?" she asked. "Yes, so you built a lie to push me away instead." She studied his face. "You see how that twisted logic just eats itself?" He nodded slowly. "I see it now. I realized it the very second your plane vanished off the radar." She leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Amber light washed the center of the room, leaving the corners in heavy shadow. It was so dead quiet she could hear their breathing, out of sync, slightly off phase, 2 separate rhythms trapped in the exact same space. "I keep turning over what I thought on that mountain," she murmured, "trying to figure out which version of you was real, the ruthless boss in the lounge, or the man I married." She held his gaze. "I've had weeks to find the answer. You want to hear it?" He nodded. They are both real, she said. That is the hardest part I had to reach. The man who drove 2 hours in a blizzard because I casually mentioned I was hungry. That was real. And the boss who took $40 million from dirty hands just to make a problem vanish. That was real, too. The man who stood in a lounge and faked absolute cruelty to push me somewhere safe. Also real. She stared him down. You are not the polished fiction. And you are not the worst-case scenario either. You are all of it. For 7 years, I only got the curated highlights. And what I've been wrestling with in Miami, on that bench, and every quiet hour since the mountain, is whether I can love the whole picture. I loved the fraction I was allowed to see. The rest I am still meeting. He looked at her with that completely unguarded expression from the staging area. The walls were still down. Is that what you want? He asked, to meet the rest of it. I don't know yet, she replied, still deciding. A heavy vibration on the chair arm interrupted them. His phone. He angled the screen her way. Ren's number. He hit speaker. Ren's voice came through sharp and clipped, tight with operational adrenaline. Viscari. 6 locations hit simultaneously at 2200 hours. Carver was taken down at the Wilmot property. 11 arrests total, including the 2 money guys who knew your account structures. A beat. It is finished. Total silence. Hargrove gets the formal resolution offer from the U.S. Attorney's Office tomorrow morning. Based on the Solano paperwork and your full cooperation, the offer matches the structured plea we discussed. Ren stated. Reduced charges. Non-custodial recommendation. A tense breath over the line. Let me be perfectly clear. The judge holds the cards here. It is no guarantee, but the U.S. attorney will fight for it. Understood. Dominic answered. Ms. Vale, Ren pressed. Yes, Serafina replied. Petra Solano entered protective custody 2 hours ago. She asked me to pass a message. A brief hesitation over the speaker. She said she came out in the rain. A long beat. I assume you know what that means. I do, Serafina murmured. Get some sleep, Ren ordered. Both of you. Tomorrow is all paperwork. And it will be brutal. The line clicked dead. The heavy quiet rushed right back in. Outside, the storm had bled out into a thin, miserable drizzle. The city lights took on that hollow late-night glare. Empty streets, leaving just the concrete bones of the skyline completely exposed. Dominic dropped the phone on the armrest. Their eyes met. Non-custodial isn't a sure thing, she said. No. There is a version of tomorrow where Hargrove walks out of that office with numbers that destroy absolutely everything. Yes, she studied the raw lines of his face, refusing to blink. Are you scared? He held her stare. Yes. Good, she whispered. That is honest. She pushed up from the couch. He moved to join her, but she raised a single hand. He froze. She crossed to the glass, turning her back to him to watch the grid below. Finally, she stopped managing the fallout, letting the crushing weight of the moment just hit her. All of it. The mountain, the lounge, that bench in Miami, the Pilsen coffee shop, the slick pavement, and the footsteps trailing them. The gut punch sound of his breath over the line when she told him she was out. 7 years of a scarred, half-buried marriage, now stripped to its bare bones in the glow of a late-night office. Exactly what it was. No more glossy surface. No more polite distance. Just the skeleton. What do you do with remains like that? You walk away. She knew that was a real option. Realized it while staring at the twisted fuselage on the mountain. Some things get blown apart, and absolutely refuse to fit back into the same shape. The bones of their marriage were real, sitting right there, and nobody was forcing her to rebuild on top of them. But Carl's words echoed back, you kept people alive, and she remembered her bitter realization back in Miami. She was complicit in being kept in the dark. Swallowing polished lies was easier than demanding the bloody truth. The empire they built needed her blind compliance to stay standing. She helped build the house that locked her out of the dangerous rooms. That was her sin, not his. She turned around. Understand this, she said. It's about me. He waited. I let it happen. Not the Carver betrayal. I never saw that coming. But the arrangement, where you handled the underworld depth, and I handled the clean surface. We both signed off on that. She locked eyes with him. I stopped asking questions. Not because I was naive, but because real answers would have triggered a war. I deliberately chose comfort over clarity. She fell quiet. That is my guilt. I own it. Something cracked in his expression. Not shock, but deep recognition. The exact look of a man starving to hear a truth dragged into the light. Finally watching it happen. I never knew you felt that, he rasped. I've had a lot of time on a freezing mountain and a Miami bench, she replied. She returned to the couch, sitting closer this time, not touching, but near she stared at the inches separating them, then met his gaze. Here is what I know. I still love you. That isn't a choice. It is just a stubborn fact I've been dragging around for weeks, trying to figure out how to survive it. She took a slow breath. And I absolutely cannot go back to what we had. Not the sick arrangement of secrets, false protection, and you unilaterally deciding what I can handle. She leveled a fierce glare at him. The only question now is if we can build something new from the bloody truth, instead of the sanitized lies. He leaned forward, elbows heavy on his knees, staring from 2 feet away. It was the scarred face she still had to reckon with. I have no idea how to be a different man, he admitted. I meant what I said on the phone. I know the theory of being better. I've agonized over the concept for weeks and I understand it completely. He stopped. Understanding the concept and surviving the reality are 2 totally different beasts. I will screw this up. I will slip back into the old, ruthless patterns because they are hammered deep into my bones. That darkness is load-bearing in who I am. A long, heavy pause. But I want to try. I will confess the second I catch myself drifting. And I am asking you, actually asking, not commanding. Not making the call for both of us to stay, while we find out if trying is actually enough to save us. She stared at him for a long time. The storm had died while they argued. She only just noticed the hollow silence pressing against the glass, that dead quiet rushing in to fill the massive void. The city at 2 a.m, operating on a skeletal hum. Okay, she breathed. His head snapped up fast. Okay, she repeated. We try this, but I dictate the terms now. Not you, not Hargrove, me. She pinned him with a merciless stare. Every locked door gets opened. Every move that paints a target on our backs gets decided together. If a threat comes, you tell me before you bury the problem, not after. Before, I am your equal partner in this, or I am gone. No middle ground. Understood? He swore quietly. And when I slip up, I will confess, he promised. Before you even have to ask. I will hold you to that, she said. I know you will. She studied his exhausted face for one last second, then turned back to the glass. The storm was completely gone. The window became a black mirror, throwing their reflection back at her, the amber lamp, the 2 of them, and the massive chasm still separating them. Grab some sleep, she told him. Tomorrow is going to be incredibly brutal. He just nodded. Neither moved a muscle. They sat trapped in the quiet aftermath. After the storm, after the federal raids. After the agonizing unspooling of every filthy syndicate secret he had ever buried, the room held them in a heavy amber glow while the city churned down below, and the long night slowly ground toward dawn. The sentencing hit 4 months later. Serafina claimed a seat in the 3rd row of a federal courtroom. The place reeked of ancient oak, cheap bleach, and the suffocating staleness of ruined lives. Hargrove anchored the defense table. Dominic sat beside her, wearing a suit he had armored up in that morning, moving with the precision of a man who knew today, demanded the raw, ugly truth, not his polished mafia fiction. The U.S. attorney slid the structured plea forward. The judge, a woman, in her 60s with glasses on a chain, and a face carved from absolute stone, studied the paperwork in dead silence. The tension in that room could choke a man. But the non-custodial recommendation somehow held firm. The gavel dropped on 5 years of probation, plus a massive fine. Hargrove figured it wiped out roughly 60% of the liquid assets tied to the Carver operations. The final condition demanded Dominic cooperate with the federal takedown of Carver's entire criminal network, but absolutely no prison time. Not a single day inside. Hargrove let out a massive breath at the defense table. The gallery behind them shifted. Serafina sat perfectly still, staring hard at the back of Dominic's head. He absorbed the sentence without a single flinch, like a boss who had braced for a cage and was now just calculating the true price of his freedom. Then he turned to face her, a single direct nod. That was all she gave him before he faced the bench again. Later, they stood outside the courthouse in the brutal gray November light. The lake wind cut right through them both. Hargrove huddled with the legal team while the city rushed past. Serafina stayed close to Dominic's side. They didn't touch. Neither of them said a single word, just breathing the freezing air, staring out at the busy street. 60% of the assets, she murmured. He confirmed it. She asked what that actually left them with. Enough to rebuild. He told her not the massive syndicate empire they had, but enough. She let that heavy truth sink in. Enough to rebuild. It felt like the right punishment. Not completely wiped out, but heavy enough to leave a permanent, ugly scar. The price of survival had to hurt. They needed to carry that crushing weight into the next chapter, never forgetting it. The lakeshore apartment, she started. She told him she wanted to sell the place immediately. He just looked at her. "I am never going back there," she added flatly. "We find somewhere else, somewhere clean. Not built on the bloody bones of the syndicate we just tore down." She took a shaky breath, needing a home that didn't have the ghosts of their mafia life, bleeding. Right through the wallpaper, Dominic stayed quiet for a long, heavy second, then he just agreed. He told her he was totally done dictating her choices. If she wanted to sell, they would sell. She got to pick the next move. Total silence followed. So that was what okay meant now. She studied his battered face. Something deep in her chest finally clicked right into place. No massive fireworks, just a quiet shift in gravity. It was the first real proof that he might actually mean what he was saying. "Come on," she told him. "Hargrove needs to review those damn probationary terms." They walked down the courthouse steps, side by side. 7 months later, Petra Solano took the stand against Carver. Serafina tracked the trial on the local news, staying far away from the courtroom. The financial leaks were exactly what Wren had promised. 11 years of bulletproof forensic accounting ripped Carver's entire syndicate apart from the inside. A jury nailed him on 23 felony counts. The judge handed down a crushing sentence: no backroom deals, no probation. Serafina read the headline in her Lincoln Square kitchen. She and Dominic had bought the place 3 months after the trial. A third-floor walk-up with battered wood floors, giant windows, and absolutely zero mafia history. Just empty rooms waiting for a much cleaner life. She locked her phone screen and went right back to brewing coffee. Dominic walked in from the hallway. He had just finished another call with Hargrove. The probation rules brought a relentless, grinding mountain of legal paperwork into their daily routine. It was the suffocating, bureaucratic tax they had to pay for survival. He spotted the phone on the granite counter and caught her eye. She told him it was Carver. Dominic picked up the device, read the news, and tossed it right back down. "Good," he muttered. That was it, one word. She watched him closely, waiting for a crack in his armor, but there was absolutely nothing. Just a flat, heavy reaction from a boss who knew the long game was over and had nothing left to prove. She poured 2 black coffees, sliding a mug into his hand. They stood leaning against the counter in the morning sun, drinking in total silence. It was the kind of quiet earned by 2 people who had just survived absolute hell together. 3 weeks after the guilty verdict, Petra called. Serafina picked up by the window, catching the harsh, low angle of the afternoon sun. That brutal early February glare, zero warmth, but sharp enough to expose every tiny crack in the glass. Petra had moved to Portland, crashing near her sister. She was doing legitimate forensic consulting now. Her voice lacked the jagged panic from that old coffee shop in Pilsen. She actually sounded grounded, like a fugitive who had finally stopped sprinting, just trying to remember how to breathe without checking over her shoulder. Serafina asked how she was holding up. "Working on it," Petra replied. She admitted it was the only honest answer she had left. Serafina told her it was the right one. Then Petra asked the exact same question back. Serafina scanned the apartment, the scratched floors, the giant windows, Dominic's heavy wool coat hanging by the door. Just the raw, beautiful mess of a life being assembled from scratch. "Working on it," Serafina finally echoed. Petra let out something that sounded like a genuine laugh, calling it a pretty good answer. They talked for 20 minutes straight. No mention of Carver, the feds, or hiding out in the Tennessee mountains. Just Portland weather, Chicago streets, and the bizarre shock of walking through a city where absolutely no one knew your crimes. They talked about waking up without immediately calculating the nearest exit, a survival reflex that had dominated their mornings for years. Just before hanging up, Petra confessed she still thought about that mountain. Serafina admitted she did too. When Petra asked what came to mind, Serafina took a slow, deep breath. She told her she thought about the impossible, brutal things that place forced them to do. The mountain didn't give a damn about their past sins or the ways they had shattered themselves, Serafina explained. It just threw them into a nightmare, and they survived it together. She called it her blueprint for facing the future. Petra went dead quiet, then whispered that it was exactly right. 14 months after that courthouse deal, their daughter was born. October leaves outside the Lincoln Square apartment were blazing hard, dying right before the deep Chicago freeze. The entire beautiful, necessary process of letting the past die. They named her Isa. Late that evening, Serafina held the baby in the dim hospital room. The visitors had finally vanished. The ward was buried in silence. Dominic slumped in the chair beside her bed, completely stripped of his mob boss armor. Just present, just a fiercely loyal man, entirely real. with absolutely nothing left to hide. Feeling the tiny, heavy warmth in her arms, Serafina was hit by something totally unexpected. It wasn't just the crushing wave of love. It was absolute clarity. The kind of sharp focus that tells you exactly why you have to survive. She glanced at Dominic. His eyes were already locked on her. Serafina swore the girl would know everything when she was old enough. Every single bloody detail, she insisted. Dominic agreed immediately. No sanitized stories, no carefully managed mafia lies, just the brutal truth. Serafina stared down at little Isa. The newborn was breathing with her entire tiny body, giving every gasp her absolute all. The real story includes the horrific parts, Serafina warned him quietly. The scars make it real, he murmured. She gave a slow nod. Dominic reached across the hospital bed and locked his hand firmly over hers. Not the hand cradling their daughter, her free one. A quiet, brutally raw gesture, completely stripped of any mafia theatrics. It struck the exact foundation they had spent 14 long months pouring in concrete. This was the ultimate proof of what they were becoming, not the cold, tactical marriage they used to share, and definitely not some hollow mob arrangement built on secrets and locked doors. This was different, jagged, but somehow freeing. A bond dragged through absolute hell, beaten to the breaking point, and forged into something 10 times stronger than before. Not just patched up, evolved, crushed under suffocating pressure until it hardened. Fast forward 3 years since the syndicate crumbled. Serafina stood in the loud lobby of their first Southside Community Center, watching a Tuesday program hum along. Teenagers huddled around tables while a woman taught financial literacy, radiating the intense energy of someone who barely survived her own massive debts. Petra actually hooked them up with the curriculum developer. That was the spark. 2 women nearly destroyed by dirty money, talking late into the night about warning signs they totally missed. They wanted to arm the neighborhood with the defenses they never had. This building was their ultimate weapon. The lobby doors swung open. Dominic pushed through with Isa riding high on his shoulders. She was 2.5 now, loud and fiercely opinionated about everything. Serafina watched them cross the floor, letting the heavy, beautiful reality wash over her. Here was the man she tore down her life to save, carrying the daughter, who would eventually hear the whole bloody truth. The room was packed with locals, learning how to survive the brutal edges of their world. Dominic set Isa down on the tile. She took off, running straight toward Serafina, moving with the blind momentum of a kid who hasn't yet learned to flinch. Serafina caught her. Dominic stepped up right beside her. She didn't even have to turn her head to know he was studying the room. The teenagers, the woman running the floor, the harsh afternoon light bleeding through the glass. Serafina didn't look at him right away. She didn't have to. You feel a guy like Dominic. You feel the gravity of a man who got dragged through absolute hell, walked out the other side wearing a different skin, and is standing right next to you. She finally met his eyes. He stared right back. No words, zero hollow apologies. Just 2 survivors, standing in a room they built from the wreckage of their past. The plane crash, the mountain, the lies, the lounge, that federal courthouse in November, the kitchen in Lincoln Square, the hospital room in October. They just stood there with their daughter between them, the late afternoon casting everything in gold. That plane vanished into a storm-filled night, and 3 days later, a woman walked down a mountain, but she wasn't the same person who went up. Not better, necessarily. Not magically healed, just warped by the crushing pressure of the ordeal, hammered into a version of herself, who learned exactly what she was capable of, when survival was the only option left on the table. But the lies were what almost killed them. Not the crash or the death threats. Not Carver's network, the federal investigation, the massive financial penalties, or the strict probation terms. It was the lies, those quiet, fiercely protective lies that did the real damage. In the end, the ugly truth was the only concrete solid enough to build an empire that actually held. She hitched Isa up onto her hip. Isa grabbed a fistful of her shirt, gripping it with the absolute certainty of a kid who knew she belonged to the boss. Serafina felt her small, warm weight and took a slow breath. She looked around at the room, the people working in it, the quiet hustle of the floor the afternoon, slowly continuing its business of bleeding out into evening. She stood there, thinking this is what enough looks like. It wasn't perfect. It definitely wasn't clean. And it carried the heavy, suffocating weight of what it cost them to get here. But it was real. Completely. Undeniably. Brutally real. And out on a mountain in Tennessee. In a November federal courthouse. And over 2 cups of coffee at 6 a.m. in a Lincoln Square kitchen. She finally learned this was the only version worth building.